Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Tanvi Taneja, coming up in the next 30 minutes. Polling begins to elect the 47th US President. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump locked in a tight race. India says Canada has developed a pattern of making allegations without evidence, slams placing of Indian diplomats under surveillance. Shooting in Karachi of Pakistan injures 2 Chinese nationals. Up first, the latest on the US presidential elections. The town of Dixville Notch in the US state of New Hampshire kicked off the polling with its traditional midnight voting on Tuesday. At midnight, the town's 6 registered voters gathered to cast the first votes on election day. Residents have cast the first ballots here for the last 60 years. In the 2020 election, only 5 residents cast their vote in this small community located in the northern White Mountains near the US border with Canada. This year's vote in Dixville Notch was notable, with a tie between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, each receiving 3 votes. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump arrived at the West Palm Beach early on Tuesday after winding up poll campaigns, as millions of Americans headed to the polls to choose between 2 sharply different visions for the country. Both Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris predicted victory in their final day of campaigning, with polls showing the race as extremely close. Trump is due to cast his vote at Mandel Recreation Center in Palm Beach. And DD India's Amritpal Singh is stationed at the West Palm Beach in the US state of Florida.
Preparations have been completed for Tuesday's election. There is no set national time for voting to begin on the morning of November 5th. Most US states begin voting at 7 a.m. in their local time, while others start as early as 5 a.m. or as late as 10 a.m. Polls close at a range of times across the country too. Voting will end as early as 6 p.m. US Eastern Time in some states. Others do not close until midnight US Eastern Time. Across the country, a surge in election threats has the authorities deploying new tactics to protect people and ballots. Given the imminent threat of violence on the election day or the following days once results start coming in, if there is a moment of denial, election officials around the country are taking no chances. Election authorities here in various counties, especially sensitive counties, are installing steel frames, bulletproof glasses, steel doors to prevent crowds or any kind of vandalism that may take place. Given that it's the US president's election, there is considerable interest from around the world. Where I am in Palm Beach County, media from around the world has gathered here. This is in fact the home county of Donald Trump, and the convention center that you see on the other side is where Donald Trump would give his victory speech from if he wins this election. As the last lap of the most controversial election in American history comes to a close, it's just a matter of hours before the Americans start voting for the November 5th election. Counting will begin soon after voting ends. And if it's a clear election, results will be out the next day. But if it gets stuck, which it could, if it goes into recounts and lawsuits, it would be days before we know who the next president of the United States would be. With cameraman Sanjay Jaina, this is Amritpal Singh at the Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
Residents of Tulasendrapuram in Tamil Nadu, the ancestral village of Kamala Harris, is holding special prayers for her success. Harris has her ancestral roots in this village located in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. The residents here are praying for her success. Her grandfather, P.V. Gopalan, served as a civil servant in India. Harris, who pursued a career in law and rose to become the U.S. state of California's first woman attorney general, eventually became the vice president of the United States in 2019. The White House is the official residence of the U.S. president. It is out of bounds for most people. DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh takes you closer to the unique history and trivia about this famous residence.
We are at the iconic White House in the United States. This is the official residence and office of the President of the United States, arguably one of the most powerful persons in the world. While we do not know who the next president of the US is going to be, let's learn more about this magnificent seat of power.
The President is both the head of the state and head of government of United States of America and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. By tradition, the President and the First Family live in the White House in Washington, D.C. White House is also the location of the President's Oval Office and offices of the senior staff. The President's desk, the Resolute desk, is as famous as the White House. Resolute desk is made from oak timbers of the British ship HMS Resolute. In 1880, Queen Victoria gifted the desk to President Rutherford B. Hayes. It has been used by nearly every president since. First President of the US, George Washington, selected the site for White House in 1791. Washington oversaw construction of the White House but never lived in it. White House was designed by Irish-born architect James Hobben. It took some 8 years to build this magnificent house. There are 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms and 6 levels in the residence. There are also 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases and 3 elevators. The White House kitchen is able to serve dinner to as many as 140 guests and appetizers to more than 1,000 people. The White House requires 570 gallons of paint to cover its outside surface. At various times in history, the White House has been known as the President's Palace, the President's House and the Executive Mansion. President Theodore Roosevelt officially gave the White House its current name in 1901.
We will soon know who the new occupant of the White House is going to be. Former President Donald Trump, he's familiar with this grand residence. For Vice President Kamala Harris, this would be the first time for her and her family to live in the White House. If she wins these elections, she would be the first woman president of the United States of America. With camera person Jaishankar, Shubhendu Ghosh for DD India in Washington, D.C.
So as the US votes, officials are calling for patience because as they tally ballots in what could be a historically close presidential race, they warn that it could take days to find out who has won. Under the US system, citizens do not vote directly for their leader. Instead, their ballots elect the 538 members of a group called the Electoral College, which then elects the president and the vice president. 81 million people have voted ahead of Tuesday in early voting, over half of the total ballots cast in 2020. Let's see as to why the results could get delayed. Certification is a formality, but there are risks of obstructions. At least 22 county election officials voted in 2022 to delay certification in battleground states. At least 35 election officials refused to certify election results and may be in a position to do so again, according to Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, D.C. Successful obstruction could impact state and federal certification deadlines. The certification process has come under scrutiny, and since Trump refused to concede the 2020 election, there has been a deluge of lawsuits from both parties ahead of Election Day, which might also complicate the tabulation. So now let's take a look at what these deadlines are. The deadline for states to certify their results is 11th December, and each state's appointed electors then cast their votes for the candidate who won in their popular vote. By 25th December, electoral certificates of each state must be received by the President of the upper chamber of the US legislature, who is also the Vice President of the US, in this case, Kamala Harris. On 6 January, the US legislature counts and confirms the results before the new president is inaugurated on 20th of January. So as Americans decide their next president, candidates have closed their election campaign with competing visions for the future of the United States. DD India's Jessica Taneja spoke to Christopher Answorth, spokesperson of the US Embassy in New Delhi.
Americans are heading to the polls to vote for their next president. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump would each need more than 270 electoral votes to win. So who will it be? Well, that we'll know after November 20th. But joining us in the DD India studios today is Christopher Elms. He's a spokesperson for the US Embassy. Christopher, thank you for joining us here on DD India. An important day for Americans today. You voted already, as you told me.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Jessica. I voted as an overseas voter. We have the opportunity as Americans to vote wherever we are in the world. So I mailed in my ballot from India, and as many Americans are voting from overseas and mailing in their ballots as well.
So how do the US elections differ from those in other democracies in terms of structure, in terms of how technically they are conducted?
So yeah, as you mentioned, we have a presidential vote happening. Everyone seems to be aware of that one. What a lot of people don't know is we are voting up and down the ballot at every level of our federal government. As well as our municipal and state governments. So we have a very decentralized system in the United States. I'm currently voting in my state for the president, for one of my senators, for my congressperson, for the state assembly, state senate, for the district attorney, so the chief prosecutor for my county, for my town clerk, for my town justice, for county judges, for state Supreme Court judges, for amendments to our Constitution, to the state Constitution. There are all sorts of things that are going to be up and down everyone's ballots that they'll be voting on. So naturally, a lot of the focus around the world is on the president, but Americans are voting on dozens of different elections on their ballots, hundreds across the United States.
German companies are wary of change in the US economic policy after the election today, according to a new survey. Joining us with more on the story is DW's Chiponda Chimbelu in Berlin. Chiponda, what more can you tell us?
Thanks for having me. Well, German companies are waiting to see what the future economic policy of the US will bring. And that largely depends on the outcome of the US elections today. Now, that's according to a survey by the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Any tariff increases on European exports could pose a risk for German companies. And for Germany's export-oriented economy, tariffs and any trade barriers would be an expensive disaster, says the director of the German Economic Institute. Now, when it comes to industries that are especially vulnerable, it is the makers of machine parts, cars, and drugs that are very dependent on trade with the United States. But despite some of the fears, German companies expect business in the US to remain stable.
And Chiponda, how have Biden's economic policies affected Germany-US trade?
One of the Biden administration's most important and far-reaching economic policies is the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. And while there were fears that the IRA would be bad for European businesses, German exports to the US have actually benefited, according to Business Daily Handelsblatt, which cites a study by the German Economic Institute. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act went into effect in the second half of 2022, with the aim of encouraging investment in domestic energy production and promoting greener technology, among others. In Europe, there were fears that it was protectionist. But last year, German exports to the US rose. Americans were the biggest buyers of German goods. Exports from Germany reached 157.9 billion euros. So that's why what happens in the US elections, of course, matters so much here. Any potential tariffs on European goods could change that.
Thank you, Chiponda. A day before the US election, the Biden government stepped up criticism of Israel for not doing enough to improve humanitarian conditions in Gaza. The US State Department called the results not good enough, as a 30-day deadline looms for Israeli officials to meet certain requirements or risk potential restrictions on military assistance. The message was conveyed by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant during a phone call. The secretary emphasized the importance of ending the conflict in Gaza and bringing all of the hostages home, as well as planning post-conflict situation there.
As of today, the situation has not significantly turned around. We have seen an increase in some measurements. We've seen an increase in the number of crossings that are open, but just if you look at the stipulated recommendations in the letter, those have not been met. We're not at the end of the period yet. They have not, if you look at what we ultimately judge, what we ultimately judge on, which is the results on the ground, the results are not good enough today. They certainly do not have a passing grade. They have failed, I said, they have failed to implement all of the things that we recommend in that letter. Now, that said, we are not at the end of the 30-day period. It's not the end of the semester. We don't hand out grades in the middle.
2 Chinese nationals were shot at and injured on Tuesday in Pakistan's commercial hub of Karachi after a string of attacks that spurred Beijing to demand tougher security for its citizens. It was not immediately clear who was responsible. In October, a bombing near Karachi's international airport killed 2 Chinese engineers in an attack claimed by separatist militant group, the Baloch Liberation Army. Still to come on this edition of DD India Live. India hosts the maiden Asian Buddhist Summit, taking forward its Act East policy. ISA showcases milestone solar projects and sets new global priorities at its 7th Assembly. And Boeing strike ends as workers accept new contract proposal.
Who will be the next president of the US? America decides. DD India reports from Ground Zero. Watch live and exclusive coverage on DD India.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I am Tanvi Thaneja. India remains deeply concerned about the safety and security of Indian nationals in Canada, especially after the violent disruption outside a consular camp in Brampton, Ontario on Sunday. After Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that such acts of violence will never weaken India's resolve, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar too expressed concern, saying it was unacceptable that Indian diplomats had been placed under surveillance by Canada.
What happened at the Hindu temple in Canada was obviously deeply concerning. You would have seen the statement first by our official spokesperson and also the expression of concern by our Prime Minister yesterday. That should, I think, convey to you how deeply we feel about it. One, Canada has developed a pattern of making allegations without providing specifics. Secondly, when we look at Canada, for us, the fact that they're putting our diplomats under surveillance is something which is unacceptable.
Earlier on Monday, the Ministry of External Affairs said that India condemns the acts of violence perpetrated by extremists and separatists, with an expectation that those indulging in violence will be prosecuted. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is currently on Australia visit in the first leg of his two-nation tour. In Canberra on Tuesday, the minister attended the inaugural session of Raisina Down Under, that is the Australian edition of India's Raisina Dialogue. The Raisina Dialogue is India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geoeconomics, addresses critical international challenges, providing a valuable platform to discuss key trends shaping the Indo-Pacific. Addressing the event, Jaishankar highlighted the remarkable growth in India-Australia partnership in recent years and India's efforts at forging diverse partnerships in a multipolar world.
I would say probably the bilateral which has changed the most is Australia. One metric of how a relationship is really so how often did the PMs meet? And if you go beyond that, you look at the quality of our defense cooperation today, the fact that we've been able to do the first phase of a free trade agreement, the fact that Australian universities were the first universities to come and say, okay, we are prepared to explore a new Indian policy regarding foreign educational presence. I look at the Indian diaspora numbers. So I look at the trade volume, which is, I think, $48 billion right now.
During his visit, India's Jaishankar met Australia's Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles. Both leaders spoke about the strong momentum in India-Australia's comprehensive strategic partnership. The minister also shared perspectives on Indo-Pacific and regional developments with Richard Marles. Buddha Dhamma is a link that connects India and Asia. They are complementary as the world looks for solutions to unrest and conflict. India hosts the first Asian Buddhist Summit, taking forward its Act East policy, which is principled on collective, inclusive and spiritual development of Asia. DD India's Anil Thomas has more.
India is hosting the first Asian Buddhist Summit. Over the next 2 days, it will celebrate the rich heritage of Buddha Dhamma and its influence across Asia. President Draupadi Murmu inaugurated the summit and highlighted the unique position Buddhism holds in the spiritual and cultural history of India and Asia.
If one word can capture the Buddha Dhamma, it has to be Karuna or passion, which is what the world needs today. As the theme of the summit has captured it well, we need to discuss the role of Buddha Dhamma in strengthening Asia.
The summit is a manifestation of India's Act East policy, which is principled on collective, inclusive and spiritual development of Asia.
Today we stand united as inheritors of this profound legacy. India, as a Janmabhoomi, the birthplace of Buddha Dhamma, reaffirms its commitment to strengthening the Dhamma Setu, the Buddhist bridge connecting Asian nations.
The theme of the summit is Role of Buddha Dhamma in Strengthening Asia.
The Prime Minister of India expressed the feelings of not only India, but the Buddhist communities of Asia, that India has given Buddha to the world, not the world. And we will follow the path of Buddha when we are adopting various considerations for the global well-being.
I would like to congratulate Union of a Government of India. Especially, I would like to deep express my gratitude this Buddhist Confederation Association. Buddhist Confederation can organize this World Buddhist Summit for the first time in India.
A special logo of the summit was also released by the President. Anil Thomas, DD India, New Delhi.
India's President Draupadi Murmu on Tuesday released 3 publications of the Supreme Court of India in New Delhi. Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud and Minister of Law and Justice Arjun Ram Meghwal were also present at the event. President Draupadi Murmu said that the Supreme Court of India has developed jurisprudence which is rooted in Indian ethos.
The Supreme Court of India has developed a jurisprudence which is rooted in the Indian ethos and realities. I have been told that the book titled Justice for the Nation, released today, captures the high points of the Supreme Court's journey of 75 years. It describes the impact of the Supreme Court on various aspects of the lives of the people. Our justice delivery system must strengthen our onward march as a just and fair society. I am glad to observe that the report on working of legal aid cells released today is devoted to the legal aid clinics operating in law schools in our country.
Global leaders gathered in New Delhi for the third high-level conference on new technologies for clean energy transition, organized by the International Solar Alliance and key partners. The event focused on advancing solar innovation to combat climate change and support global climate goals through collaboration, technology and knowledge sharing.
The International Solar Alliance, in collaboration with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, hosted the third high-level conference on new technologies for clean energy transition. Held alongside the 7th ISA Assembly in New Delhi, this event brought together global stakeholders in the journey towards clean energy. Prahlad Joshi, India's Minister of New and Renewable Energy and the President of the ISA, spoke on the collective global effort in the energy transition.
As far as the President is concerned, India was elected unanimously, that is unopposed. This shows how the world is recognizing India's efforts as far as especially in the renewable concern under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Modi. And now people have accepted the leadership of India because of our performance and commitment.
The conference focused on driving dialogue into action with in-depth sessions on innovative solar and storage technologies. The discussions aimed to highlight how solar power can advance equitable economic, social and environmental progress.
It's our ADB's responsibility to facilitate that emerging economies have access to technologies and finance to attain green growth. Cost of solar PV has declined by over 80% in the last decade to about 5 cents per kilowatt hour.
ISA's Director General Dr. Ajay Mathur emphasized the timelines of this gathering, noting that it aligns with the upcoming COP29 in Azerbaijan.
This event is very timely because in a week, the world leaders will be meeting at COP29 in Baku to discuss two of our guiding goals that we decided at Dubai last year, tripling the renewable energy goal and doubling the energy efficiency goal.
An added attraction at the inaugural was the launch of the third edition of the World Solar Report series. The inaugural also witnessed the release of the Readiness Assessment of Green Hydrogen African Countries report by ISA and Denmark. Tapash Bhattacharya's report, DD India.
Boeing workers in the US on Monday accepted the aircraft manufacturer's latest contact offer, ending a 7-week strike that crippled production of the 737 MAX and 777. West Coast factory workers voted with 59% in favor of the new contract, which includes a 38% pay rise spread over 4 years. However, the deal does not restore a defined benefit pension that Boeing froze in 2014, a key demand of some employees.
You know, it's time for us to come together. This is a victory, and we achieved something that we hadn't achieved for the last 22 years. I'm proud of this membership. You can be proud of yourselves as well. You stood strong and you stood tall and you won.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of hosting the Olympics and Paralympic Games in India in 2036 has taken a significant step forward. Indian Olympic Association has formally sent letter of intent to the Future Host Commission International Olympic Committee on 1st of October this year, expressing India's interest to host the Olympics and Paralympics Games in 2036. This monumental opportunity could bring substantial benefits, fostering economic growth, social progress and youth empowerment across India. That's all for this edition of DD India Live. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can catch all the latest news and updates on our DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.
Who will be